I'm going to abuse position of the chair and lead us off in this segment. Now, Suella Braverman faces outrage from the Liberal Labour Party and the Liberal wing of the so-called Conservatives. Once again, what's new? Here's what she said. She said, "The progress flag screams one thing. Our government allowed the mutilation of children in hospitals. Too many Tory politicians insisted this flag must fly." And she added, "There are numerous whistleblower reports." This is my opinion, actually. There are numerous whistleblower reports from the NHS Tavistock Clinic showing that what she just said there can be seen as true, because there were children, some may be autistic, some may be gay, but all healthy, sacrificed, in my opinion, on the altar of this unchallenged and unchallengeable ideology in an age of the sort of stonewallisation of politics. Now, the Labour MP for me, Stella Creasy, called Braverman's comments bile. But I tell you what's bile. Labour MPs like Rosie Duffield have been hounded for challenging Labour's stance that places trans rights above women's rights. Now, some demanded Braverman's expulsion from the Conservatives. Now, they'd need quite the list, I'd say, to go with her, because there are many in that party that agree. And I think that bizarre flag doesn't represent the LGB, and calling out this pride movement's alphabet asylum shouldn't be seen as career ending and shouldn't be viewed as controversial as it has been this week. Now, I'm going to start with Madeline Grant as a newbie to the show, and indeed to the panel. Now, Madeline, I assume you don't agree with the rhetoric used, or the hyperbole, you might see it. Don't wish to put words into your mouth. You're perfectly capable of forming them yourself. But do you agree with the overall sentiment of what she's saying?
I think she said a lot of things that were true. But the trouble with Suella Braverman is that she often tends to, am I right in thinking that she said this abroad in America?
She
does have a habit of going and speaking to a kind of a foreign audience rather than a domestic one. And I think the problem with this is that we're having this very public falling out between different wings of the Conservative Party is, I would say, unhelpful to their chances of forming unity. And although I think she made a lot of very true points, I think there's a way of making those points without sounding, because it allows your critics to misrepresent and attack you for what you said, however true it is. I think you have to be all the more careful with your language at a time when, the left is definitely on the it has triumphed in the general election, and I think is often on the lookout for things that can be used against people on the right.
Renee, now as a doctor, I mean, you've expressed concerns about this very issue on this show before. Wes Streeting seems to be of the view that, puberty blockers should be banned, if the reports are correct. We haven't had confirmation on that. I'm wondering, do you think actually Suella Braverman has won the argument?
I think, look, the argument's been won by lots of women in this arena who have been saying these things in various ways for quite some time, and they've been shut down. Unfortunately, the left are now trying to shut Suella down on this, and she has allowed them to do it by the language that she's used. Having said that, I think the people that have been upset by this will be the politicians around her and the left. I think if you go out onto the streets and talk to the average person, they'll say, damn right, she's saying what we feel.
I don't think the average person feels physically repulsed by a flag. That is just an outrageous thing to say. Look, I don't like the progress flag. I think there was nothing wrong with the original Gilbert Baker pride flag. There was absolutely nothing wrong with it. I hate the progress flag.
Why do you hate it? Why?
It's ugly. There was no need for an update on the pride flag because the original pride flag included everyone, and the different colours had different meanings. We don't need a stripe for black people, a stripe for brown people, a stripe for whatever. We don't need it. There was nothing wrong with the original flag. I don't like it. I don't go around going on national television saying I feel physically repulsed by a pride flag which represents a portion of the population in this country.
But I
think if you went around and if someone said I'm physically repulsed by the Star of David, I'm physically repulsed by the Christian cross, I'm physically repulsed by the Islamic sickle, people would not accept it. So why is it acceptable for Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary of this country, potential future Tory leadership contender, why is it acceptable to anyone for her to say she's physically repulsed by a flag that represents people in this country?
Firstly, you're putting that flag on a pedestal with some very ancient religious symbolism. I don't think the two sit side by side. That's number one. I don't think you can compare them.
No.
And I think I've got a lot of gay friends who are repulsed by that flag.
yeah.
They want nothing to do with it. They don't want it as part of their identity.
You think it's reasonable for a politician to say they're physically repulsed by a flag that represents people's identities?
I said she should have picked her words differently, but I think her
So you agree with me?
I think her sentiment will be recognised as meaningful to lots of people.
Benjamin, I mean, Wes Street in the Telegraph apparently banning puberty blockers and all these other things. You might disagree. You might agree with Renee that actually the language was wrong, but actually the messaging was right. I mean, do you think that's where Labour's at?
Well, I don't think Suella Braverman was actually talking about anything as specific as the health implications of puberty blockers.
Well, she said mutilation.
She was attacking a community, and you said in your remarks that it shouldn't be controversial. The only reason she is saying it and saying it in that way is because controversy is her currency. She hopes that she can try and do a sort of Boris Johnson act of being so outrageous and having all this grassroots right swings. No, but what she's trying to do is whip up these right-wing grassroots so that MPs feel pressured to put her through. It's not going to work. You know, quite frankly, the fact that when Parliament returned, she flew to America rather than doing what her job is for her constituents on day one, I think tells you where her priorities are. And she has proven that she is not qualified to run a country, because one of the first responsibilities of being a leader is to bring people together. That includes people that don't sit easily with you. That is a job of leadership. And I bet you Suella Braverman will never see the inside of the cabinet room again, because she won't get anywhere near being Conservative Party leader this year. And the version of the Conservative Party that one day wins a general election will not look anything like what Braverman is saying.
You might be right, but Keir Starmer didn't go very far to bring Rosie Duffield in and make her feel
the Kent MPs took a photograph, Madeleine,
I saw that.
and Rosie Duffield wasn't in it.
That's wrong. They took a photograph of the newly elected MPs, and she's not newly elected.
Well, I mean,
she was the only Kent MP before, wasn't she?
I mean,
so every Kent Labour MP took a picture apart from Rosie Duffield. That's what happened, isn't it?
There are so many examples of times.
Keir Starmer and chose to be a Labour MP. So clearly she doesn't have a fundamental problem with the Labour Party.
She's many times talked about how ostracised she's been made to feel, and how no one has reached out to her, nobody has apologised to her. Like, I think that's not in doubt. And it's pretty bloody shameless that today, I think, or yesterday, Lisa Nandy said that we're putting an end to culture wars now, as if they've never had a hand in this themselves, as if this is always some invention of the right. You know, it really gets me. I think it's almost, I would almost go so far as to use the word gaslighting. Because we can see how Labour have engaged in culture wars. It's almost like, if someone wants to tear down a statue, it's like, well, that's not a culture war. And if you're like, please don't tear down the statue, they're like, stop doing the culture war. You know, I'm so fed up with it. And it's been used, they've been using that framing all the time when it comes to trans.
There was a poll out this last week from More in Common of the issues that motivated people's decision of how to vote. Just 1% of people said transgender issues decided
But that doesn't mean that it's right to mutilate children, though, does it? It's about what's good.
But the point is that any party that obsesses over this is going to lose.